Hi, this is Bernie, your Uber elder, taking a short break in Santa Rosa, along Highway 101 here, looking at these two valley oaks. You know, these are the keystone species of the Laguna de Santa Rosa, which is the watershed within which we are standing. And keystone species is that key species that preserves the habitat for the ecosystem. And if it were taken out, that kind of ends the nature of that ecosystem, probably degrading it, certainly changing it. And that certainly has happened here in Santa Rosa. In this watershed, the European Americans coming here after the Spanish coming here with their cattle, they took ownership of the land. Before they came, this was the home of the Pomo, the Wapo, coastal Miwok. Those indigenous tribes, they didn't own the land, but they did value the ecosystem that they lived in. They lived in balance, in harmony with that nature. They collected the acorns here, but they shared it with the wood rats and the birds and the insects and all the living creatures that have their home and their survival dependent on these valley oaks. Well, as you can see here, they've been preserved from a construction project, and thankfully so. However, they're not really holding an ecosystem like they once did, surrounded by asphalt, freeway, Dick's Sporting Goods. The habitat is gone. If you move out of here, you get into monoculture of vineyards. That's a different habitat than existed here. And you know, this gets to the root of the problem that I see with our industrial civilization. It really started with the idea of owning property. The idea that you can put on the asphalt, you can fence, even public property that you can get by eminent domain and for the public good, put in this freeway. The idea of property, to my mind, is really theft. It's theft first from the indigenous folks that didn't own it in the same way the Europeans own things, recorded with meets and bounds or property lines and county recorder that you could buy and sell and lease and do with as you wish, subject to some rules. But ultimately, you get title insurance, which hires the lawyers to defend the right for you to have purchased it, and you now own it. And so with that ownership came the destruction of the ecosystem. It was no longer humans living within the ecosystem, but actually taking it over, managing it, owning. And from that ownership came all other forms of ownership, like the rights to the lumber in the trees, the rights to the water, that you could take water out of one watershed and bring it to another area that wanted it and could pay for it, that you could buy and sell water, that you can buy and sell mineral rights, even intellectual property rights. Property is theft. Property takes from the future for the benefit of somebody now who gets to prosper as the result of claiming a part of nature, a part of the world as their own, to do with as they wish, to accumulate wealth by accumulating property. I'm a realtor, and you can call me a hypocrite. I do help people buy and sell real estate. I do survive in this civilization, but that doesn't mean I can't find fault where I think fault lies. And this fault comes all the way back from the divine right of kings, where the king got to say, I own this entire country, this entire continent, or part of a continent, this entire watershed. It comes from the doctrine of discovery that the church had, that said, if you Christians come upon a land where there are no Christians, well, you take that land in the name of the church and the king of this country. It comes from the feudal system where there were property owners and they could subdivide and give it to their friends and elites and dukes and earls, and could be further subdivided, and ultimately then the people worked it where the slaves, if you will, the pawns, the lower castes could not own property. And you know, when they came to the United States, and our founding fathers, of course, they were property owners, old white men, property owners, who said, we don't need to put anything about the property in the Constitution because that's a natural right. So the Constitution doesn't tell us why we have a right to own property. That's carried forward from British common law because it was convenient for these property owners not to have to justify how it was taken from the indigenous people, how the theft of land, not only in North America, but throughout the rest of the world by Europeans with their idea of law, meaning people get to own things. That now means we own intellectual property rights, trademarks, patents. Patents are in the Constitution, but that's the only form of property that is really justified in the Constitution. So the copyright protection of what we call intellectual property or artistic property, it's so pervasive in our way of thinking that it's hard for us to think without the property. But I'm reminded by these oak trees, a keystone species of an ecosystem that has now turned into a, in my mind, nightmare. The way we live now is destroying the planet. We must start seeing it, we must start talking about it, we must start admitting it to ourselves and recognizing that our fundamental faults are hundreds of years old, maybe thousands of years old, but nevertheless, we're now at a point where we can see what it's all leading to.